"Take me. I will bear your children," she said. And the rancher took her. Clara wiped the sweat from her brow as she stepped off the rickety bus, her boots sinking slightly into the dusty ground. The road to the ranch had been long and dusty, stretching over miles of open land with nothing but the occasional tumbleweed rolling past. She clutched her small bag tightly, the only belonging she had managed to bring with her. There was a mix of excitement and nervousness bubbling inside her, and yet she tried to steady her breathing. She had come here with hope, but also with a quiet determination. The ranch, Ethan's ranch, was known in the nearby towns as a place of hard work, honesty, and isolation. It was a man's world, they said, and the rancher himself was known as a quiet, strong, and often stubborn man. Clara had heard stories about him. Ethan was not unkind, but he was a man who kept his life simple, focused entirely on the land and the cattle he cared for. Widowed young, he had raised the ranch alone for years, and in that time, he had become a figure of respect among the neighboring farmers. He wasn't the type to waste words, and many said that his heart was as tough as the leather of the saddles he used. Clara didn't care about all of that. She cared about finding a place where she could belong, where she could have some stability, and perhaps, one day, build a life she had always dreamed of. The ranch appeared over the horizon, a cluster of buildings surrounded by miles of open land. A wooden fence stretched across the property, weathered by years of sun and wind. Smoke curled lazily from the chimney of the main house, promising warmth and the faint smell of wood fire. Clara's heart gave a small jump, breath of vision. She had worked in many towns before, but this was different. There was a raw honesty to the place, something that made her feel both small and oddly brave at the same time. She approached the main house cautiously, her boots crunching on the gravel. As she neared, a figure emerged from the barn. Tall, broad-shouldered, with sun-creased skin and hands calloused from work, Ethan paused and looked up. His dark eyes studied her carefully, as if trying to measure the weight of her intentions before she had even spoken. Clara straightened her shoulders, forcing herself to stand tall. She was a stranger here, and she knew it. She also knew that first impressions mattered. "Hello," she said, her voice calm but firm. "I'm looking for work." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, not in suspicion, but in assessment. "Work?" he asked. His voice was low, steady, and carried the weight of someone who didn't waste words. "What kind of work?" "I can cook, clean, help with the house," Clara replied. She swallowed the nervous lump in her throat and decided to be honest. "I can also help with smaller tasks around the ranch. I'm a quick learner." Ethan studied her for a long moment, then gestured toward the porch. "Come in." "We'll talk." Clara followed, feeling a mixture of relief and apprehension. The house was simple but warm, with wooden floors that creaked slightly under her weight. The smell of fresh bread mingled with the faint scent of horses and hay. Clara's stomach rumbled unexpectedly, and she quickly hid her reaction behind a polite cough. They sat across from each other at a worn wooden table. Ethan poured a cup of coffee and offered it to her. Clara accepted it gratefully, holding the cup in her hands as if it were a small shield against the uncertainty of what was to come. "I don't usually hire strangers," Ethan said finally.
"This is a quiet place. Not much happens here beyond work, day in and day out."
"Are you sure you can handle that?" "I've managed before. I've worked hard my whole life, and I can work harder if I need to." "I just need a chance." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes drifting to the window where the sun was beginning to dip behind the hills. The ranch stretched far and wide, and it required constant care. It wasn't a place for someone looking for ease or luxury. It was a place for people who could rise early, work long, and keep going when everything else seemed to weigh them down. Clara understood that. "I'll tell you the truth," she said, breaking the silence.
I'm not just here for work.
She paused, sensing the curiosity in his gaze. She swallowed again and decided honesty was the only path forward.
I want to be part of something lasting. A family. A home. And, if it's possible,
I want to build that with you. Ethan's eyebrows shot up slightly.
wasn't used to women speaking so directly. The pause stretched between them, heavy and uncertain. Clara held her ground. "I know it's sudden," she added quickly, "but I mean what I say. Take me. I will bear your children. I want to build a life with you, if you let me. Spec." The words hung in the air like a fragile thread. Ethan blinked, not out of disbelief but out of surprise. This was not a conversation he had ever imagined having. A mix of emotions passed across his face. Shock, confusion, and something softer, almost curiosity. Running a hand over his face, trying to process the sudden vulnerability of the woman sitting before him.
He began, then stopped, unsure of how to continue.
Clara waited, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "That's a lot to take in," he finally said, his voice measured. "Breaths. I've lived alone for a long time. I've made this ranch my life. I don't know if I'm ready for that." "I understand," Clara said gently. "I don't expect you to decide now. I want you to know my intentions are true. I'm not here for a temporary life or for convenience. I want to work. I want to create something lasting. If that's possible, I hope you'll consider it." Ethan looked at her for what felt like an eternity. He could see the honesty in her eyes, the determination that refused to be dismissed. It was rare for someone to speak so openly, to risk so much by being completely sincere, and in that moment he realized that her presence could bring warmth to a life that had grown too solitary. "All right," he said finally, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You can stay. You'll start tomorrow." "We'll see how it goes." Clara's face lit up, but she kept her excitement contained.
"Thank you," she said softly. "I won't let you down."
Clara walked to the small room she would occupy, a simple space with a narrow bed and a wooden dresser. She unpacked her few belongings carefully, making the space her own. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the scent of the fields and the distant cattle. Clara lay down on the bed, feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and anticipation. Bear him. She had taken the first step into a life that was uncertain, but also full of possibility. The next morning, Clara rose before dawn. The sky was painted in soft shades of pink and orange as she stepped outside, feeling the crisp air on her skin. Ethan was already in the barn, moving with the practiced ease of a man who had spent his life in rhythm with the land. She watched him quietly, noting the strength in his movements, the careful way he tended to each task. There was dignity in the work, a quiet respect for the land and life it provided. As the days passed, Clara settled into the routine of the ranch. She cooked breakfast for Ethan each morning, helped with cleaning and organization, and learned quickly how to assist with small chores around the property. She proved herself capable, reliable, and patient. Each day she observed Ethan, learning the nuances of his character, the small smiles he gave when satisfied with work well done, the way his hands trembled slightly when he was tired but refused to stop, the quiet moments when he would stand on the porch, looking out at the fields, as if he were listening to some private rhythm of the land. Despite her initial boldness, Clara found herself feeling a quiet respect for the man. He was not perfect, nor was he romantic in the conventional sense, but he was honest, hard-working, and deeply connected to the land. And in his silence she sensed a capacity for care and loyalty that few others possessed. One evening, after the sun had dipped low and the sky turned a deep shade of indigo, Ethan called Clara to the porch. The air was cool and the first stars were beginning to appear. "You've settled in well," he said, his tone steady but not unkind. "I can see you're serious about this place." "I am," Clara replied, her voice soft but certain. "I want to be here. I want to contribute. I want to be part of your life if you'll let me." Ethan regarded her quietly, his mind turning over her words. There was a simplicity in her honesty, a courage in her declaration that he had not expected. And though he did not yet know what the future would hold, he realized that the arrival of this woman, so determined, so open, was beginning to stir something he had long thought buried within himself. As the night settled over the ranch, Clara returned to her room with a sense of calm. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she felt that she had taken a step toward the life she had always dreamed of, a life filled with purpose, connection, and the possibility of love. And for Ethan, as he closed the barn door behind him and stood in the quiet darkness, he felt the faintest flicker of change stir in his heart, a change he had not expected, but one that might just lead him to something he had never thought possible. The days at the ranch settled into a steady rhythm. Clara woke before dawn each morning, the soft chill of the early air brushing her cheeks as she stepped outside to greet the day, browned in despair. Eating the chickens, checking the larder, helping with small chores around the barn, and preparing breakfast for Ethan before he began the long day of tending cattle. Every movement, every task was a new learning experience. Breaths. She was determined to prove herself, not just for Ethan, but for the life she dreamed of, a life where she could belong. Ethan watched her quietly from the barn most mornings, noticing the care she put into her work. There was a steadiness in her that matched the land itself. Unlike many who came and went from the town looking for easy work, Clara stayed. She asked questions, learned it quickly, and seemed genuinely interested in the rhythms of the ranch. It was unusual, and it made him uncomfortable in ways he did not fully understand. He found himself thinking about her more often than he wanted to admit.
At first, it was simple curiosity.
She had come into his life unannounced, speaking words that startled him, offering him something he had long thought impossible: companionship and family. But as the weeks passed, her presence began to feel like a quiet warmth in the house, a steady light that made the early mornings less lonely and the long workdays more bearable. Clara, for her part, observed Ethan closely. She did not expect him to be openly affectionate. He was a man of few words, but she paid attention to the small gestures, the way he softened when speaking to the animals, the way he lingered for a moment when the sun hit the horizon just right, and the way he occasionally allowed himself a quiet smile when a task was completed perfectly. She respected his solitude but also felt drawn to the depth behind his stoic exterior. One afternoon, while she was mending a torn blanket in the small sewing room, Clara heard the sound of boots on the wooden floor behind her. She looked up to see Ethan standing in the doorway, his brow slightly furrowed.
"You've been working hard," he said simply, his voice carrying a mixture of observation and approval.
Ooh. Clara smiled, trying not to let her heart race. "I want to be useful," she replied. "I want to help however I can." Ethan stepped closer, his eyes scanning the blanket she was repairing. "You've got a careful hand," he said, nodding. "Break. That's important around here. Things break or tear, and it's not always easy to fix them. You've got patience. That's good."
"Thank you," Clara said softly.
She felt a flicker of pride. Praise from Ethan was rare and meaningful. There was a pause, the kind that seemed heavier than normal conversation. Clara wanted to say more, to speak of the life she wished to build with him, but she held back. Rasp. She had learned quickly that Ethan did not respond well to words he did not initiate. Instead, she nodded and continued her work, the silence between them comfortable rather than tense. Over the next few weeks, the quiet rhythm of the ranch became their unspoken bond. Clara worked diligently, and Ethan, in his own way, began to trust her. She learned to anticipate his needs, preparing meals before he returned from the fields, keeping the house in order, and even learning to assist with small ranch chores that did not require heavy lifting but needed attention and care. He began to allow her into parts of his life he had kept private for years. Breath. Despite the growing comfort, there was an underlying tension neither of them could ignore. Clara's initial bold words, her declaration that she wanted to bear his children and build a life together, hung quietly in Ethan's mind. Rasp. He respected her honesty, but he was cautious. He had lived alone for years, shaped by loss and the responsibilities of running the ranch. The idea of family, of companionship, of opening his heart again was frightening. He had learned to rely only on himself, and the thought of vulnerability made him tense. One evening after a long day in the fields, Ethan returned to the house with dirt-streaked hands and a tired expression. Clara was already preparing dinner, the smell of roasting meat and fresh bread filling the kitchen. Breaths. She looked up and offered a small smile.
"You're early today," she said, setting a plate in front of him.
"Repairs. I finished the fence repairs quicker than expected," he replied, taking his seat. His eyes softened slightly as he looked at her. There was a quiet admiration in the way he observed her, not just for her work, but for her presence. Clara served the meal, trying to keep the conversation light. Breath. "The weather's been good for the cattle," she said. "They've been grazing well. I even saw a few calves playing near the creek." Ethan nodded, chewing slowly. "Good. We'll need strong calves this year. Winter will be harsh." The conversation continued in small, careful exchanges, the kind that built a foundation without rushing into intimacy. Clara listened more than she spoke, allowing Ethan to take the lead, gently weaving her thoughts into the conversation when appropriate. Breath. She had learned that patience was as important as courage. After dinner, they moved to the porch, the evening air cool and filled with the sounds of crickets and distant cattle. Ethan leaned back in his chair, watching the horizon. Clara sat nearby, her hands folded neatly in her lap. "You've settled in well," Ethan said finally, breaking the silence. "I didn't expect you to adapt so quickly." Clara smiled faintly. "I want to be here. I want to belong." I hope that's okay with you."
Ethan's gaze softened, and for a moment, the stoicism that usually defined him wavered.
"It's not a bad thing," he said carefully. "I could see you care, and that counts for more than most would expect. But you need to understand something. Life here isn't easy."
It's work every day, all day. It's not just the land and the animals. It's responsibility.
Breaths. And responsibility. It's not light.
I understand, Clara said firmly. I can handle it.
I want to be part of that responsibility. I want to help you, And I want to build something that lasts. Ethan studied her closely. There was sincerity in her eyes, an honesty he could not ignore. But there was also a vulnerability, a quiet hope that made him cautious. He had lost someone dear in his past, and the thought of opening his heart again was both enticing and terrifying. Breaths. I need time, he said finally, his voice measured. I can't promise what you hope for. Not yet. But I can promise this. You'll have my respect, and you'll have a place here. We'll take it one day at a time. Breath. Clara nodded, a mix of relief and anticipation filling her chest. Understood the weight of his words. He was not giving her what she wanted outright, but he was opening the door. And for her, that was enough. The following weeks were a delicate dance of proximity and distance. Clara worked tirelessly, showing Ethan that her intentions were genuine. She learned to read his moods, anticipating when he needed quiet and when he welcomed conversation. Ethan, in turn, began to let her into his world gradually, allowing her to help with the cattle during lighter chores, teaching her about the land, and even sharing small stories of his past. One afternoon while mending a fence together, Ethan paused and looked at Clara. You're stronger than I thought, he said.
You keep up well, even in this heat.
Clara wiped the sweat from her brow and smiled.
I have to.
I want to help. And you do, he said quietly. More than I expected. There was a silence that followed, comfortable and unspoken, as if the land itself was listening. Clara felt a flutter in her chest, but she focused on the task at hand, knowing that trust and connection took time to grow. At night, as Clara lay in her small room, she reflected on the days that had passed. She had grown fond of Ethan, not just for the quiet strength he displayed, but for the glimpses of softness he allowed her to see. And she knew that patience was key. She could not force him to feel something he was not yet ready to embrace. She could only continue to be honest, diligent, and present. Ethan, too, felt the change within himself. He had been alone for so long, shaped by loss and routine, that he had forgotten what it meant to hope for something beyond the ranch. Clara's presence stirred something dormant, a possibility he had not dared imagine. He was still cautious, still hesitant, but he found himself thinking of her more often, wondering how her life and his might intertwine. One evening, after the sun had dipped low, Clara brought a cup of tea to Ethan, who was sitting on the porch, watching the horizon. You've been quiet today, she said gently, setting the cup beside him. I've been thinking, he replied, his gaze still on the distant hills. About this place. About us. About what it means to have someone here. Someone who matters. Clara sat down beside him, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I want to matter, she said softly. I want to be part of this life with you, if you'll let me. Ethan turned to look at her, the faintest trace of a smile tugging at his lips. I don't know what the future holds, he said quietly. But I know one thing. I'm glad you're here.
And in that moment, under the fading light of day, Clara felt a quiet certainty.
The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time she felt that she was exactly where she needed to be. The ranch, the land, and the man who owned it were all becoming part of the life she had long dreamed of, a life of purpose, connection, and perhaps, one day, love. The weeks turned into months, and the rhythm of the ranch became second nature to Clara. She woke with the sun, moved through the house quietly, and worked with a determination that impressed Ethan more than he cared to admit. The work was demanding, exhausting at times, but it was honest work, and Clara found a sense of fulfillment in the routines that shaped each day. She was no longer just an observer. She had become part of the life of the ranch. Ethan noticed the change in her. She was no longer tentative or cautious in her tasks. She moved with confidence, her hands skilled from repetition and care. He also noticed the subtle ways she seemed to care for him, not in words, which she rarely spoke about feelings, but in gestures. She made sure his boots were cleaned before he left in the morning, prepared his favorite meals, and always left the porch, swept and tidy. It was not done for praise. She did it because she wanted the house, the ranch, and he himself to feel whole. One afternoon, as the summer sun hung high and hot in the sky, Ethan called Clara to the barn. She hurried over, the smell of hay and leather thick in the air. Ethan was working on a section of fence that had been weakened by the recent storm. "You've got a strong arm," he said, glancing at her as she lifted a heavy post into place. "You're learning faster than I expected." Clara wiped the sweat from her forehead, smiling. "I have to keep up," she said. "I want to help."
He shook his head slightly, but there was a trace of a smile on his lips. "You do more than help."
"You make this easier in ways you might not realize."
Clara felt a warmth in her chest.
Praise from Ethan was rare, but it meant more than words could express. She worked silently, focusing on the fence, yet her mind lingered on his words. They were simple, unembellished, but honest, and honesty was something she had learned to value above all else. As the day wore on, they worked side by side, the sound of hammers and the rustle of hay filling the barnyard. Occasionally, Ethan would glance at Clara, noting how she handled the tools, how she moved among the animals, how she seemed to understand the rhythm of the ranch instinctively. She was not just a worker, she was becoming part of the land itself, part of his life. When the work was done, they rested on the porch. The air was warm, scented with the sweet grass of the fields and the faint tang of cattle. Clara handed Ethan a glass of water and he took it, letting the cool liquid soothe his tired throat. "You've changed things here," he said quietly. "Not just the work, but how it feels to be here."
Clara looked at him, curious. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, then shrugged slightly.
"It's lighter, somehow. Less lonely." "You've brought life back into the house and the ranch. I didn't think that was possible." Breaths. Clara smiled softly. "I'm glad," she said. "I want this place to feel like home, for both of us." The words hung between them, gentle and meaningful. Ethan did not respond immediately, but the shift in his expression was subtle. There was a softness in his eyes that Clara had rarely seen, a vulnerability that spoke of trust and, perhaps, something more. Weeks later, Clara discovered she was expecting. At first, she felt a mixture of joy and apprehension. She had long dreamed of building a family, but she also understood the weight of responsibility that came with it. The ranch was demanding, and raising a child here would be no easy task. But the moment she shared the news with Ethan, she realized that the life she had hoped for might truly be within reach. Ethan listened quietly, his face unreadable at first. Breaths. He had expected many things in life, but this revelation was new, a challenge he had not anticipated. He had built walls around himself, believing that solitude and hard work were enough to sustain him. But as he looked at Clara, her eyes bright with hope and certainty, he realized that his heart was ready for something he had long denied himself. "This changes things," he said finally, his voice steady but low. "But it doesn't have to be bad. We'll manage. We'll make it work."
Breath.
Clara nodded, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I know we can."
"I want to do this with you, Ethan. I want our child to grow up here, with love and care. A simple gesture that carried more meaning than any words. It was a promise, a silent acknowledgement that they would face the challenges together, that he was no longer alone in his responsibilities or in his heart.
As the months passed, the ranch grew more alive. Clara's pregnancy brought a new energy to the household.
She continued her work, though at a slower pace, and Ethan adjusted his routines to accommodate her. He grew more attentive, not only in practical matters but also in subtle, quiet ways, offering support without intruding, protecting without controlling. Their connection deepened, built on trust, respect, and the shared rhythm of daily life.
There were moments of tension, of course.
The work on the ranch was never easy, and unexpected challenges arose. A sudden storm damaging the fences, a sick calf needing care, supplies running low. Problem required both of them to think quickly, work together, and sometimes make sacrifices. Yet with every obstacle, their bond strengthened. They learned to rely on each other, to communicate without words, and to find comfort in shared purpose.
One evening, after a long day of repairing a section of fence and moving cattle, Ethan and Clara sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind the hills.
The sky was painted in shades of orange and purple, the fields bathed in golden light. Clara rested her hand on her growing belly, feeling the gentle movements of the life within her. Ethan watched her quietly. He could not recall the last time he had felt such peace. The ranch had always been his life, but now it felt fuller, warmer, as if her presence had breathed new life into it. "You'll be a good mother," he said quietly, more to himself than to her.
Clara looked up, surprised by the words. "Do you really think so?" Ethan nodded, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips.
Desk. "I do. You care so much. You'll give everything you have. That child will be lucky to have you." A warmth spread through Clara's chest, and she reached out, placing her hand over his. "And you'll be a good father," she said softly. "You already care so much, even without knowing it." They sat together in silence, the quiet evening wrapping around them like a protective blanket. The challenges of the future were still ahead, but for the first time they felt prepared to face them, not alone, but together. As Clara's pregnancy progressed, she and Ethan began preparing for the new arrival. They cleaned and organized the small guest room, transforming it into a nursery with simple furniture and handmade decorations. Clara spent hours sewing small blankets and clothing, while Ethan built shelves and repaired old furniture he had stored away for years. It was a labor of love, a testament to their growing commitment to each other and the life they were creating. Despite the work, they found moments of quiet joy. They walked through the fields hand in hand, speaking little but understanding much. They laughed over small mishaps, shared stories of their pasts, and dreamed quietly of the future. Each day their connection deepened, and the walls that Ethan had built around his heart continued to crumble. One particularly warm afternoon, Clara sat by the creek, skipping stones across the water, while Ethan watched from a distance. She laughed as the stones bounced unevenly, and he found himself smiling genuinely, a rare and treasured expression. "You've changed this place," he said when he finally approached her. Clara looked up, curiosity in her eyes. "How do you mean?" Ethan shrugged, a little awkwardly. "But not just the work, not just the house. It's everything. You've brought life into it, into me." I didn't think that was possible." Clara smiled softly, feeling a warmth that went beyond the summer sun. "I'm glad. I wanted to help." "I wanted to belong." Ethan nodded, his gaze distant for a moment. you do, more than you know. As the summer waned and the first hints of autumn colored the fields, Clara's belly grew round with the child they were to welcome. The ranch, once a place of solitude and routine, had become a home filled with hope and anticipation. Each day brought small joys. The soft coos of the animals, the smell of bread baking in the oven, the quiet moments shared on the porch at sunset. Ethan found himself thinking of the future more often than the past. He imagined his child running through the fields, heard their laughter in the barn, and saw Clara guiding them with patience and care. It was a future he had not dared hope for, but now he could not imagine life without it. And Clara, feeling the gentle movements of their child, understood that she had found the life she had long dreamed of. Not easy, not perfect, but filled with love, trust, and the promise of something lasting. She had taken a bold step months ago, and now, as the ranch hummed with quiet energy, she realized that courage and honesty had brought her here, to a life that was both ordinary and extraordinary in its own quiet way. Together they faced the challenges ahead, their hearts intertwined, their purpose shared. The ranch was more than a place of work. It was a home, a sanctuary, and soon a cradle for new life. And in the soft glow of each evening, as the sun set over the fields and the wind whispered through the grass, Ethan and Clara understood that love, when patient and honest, could grow in the most unexpected of places. The early morning sun spilled gold across the fields, painting the ranch in a warm glow. Clara stirred gently, her hand resting on her round belly, feeling the soft, familiar movements of the child within her. Breaths. She had grown accustomed to these quiet moments, watching the sunrise, listening to the wind rustle through the trees, and feeling the gentle life that she and Ethan had created together. The ranch, once a place of solitude and routine, now pulsed with the promise of new beginnings. Ethan emerged from the barn, his hands rough and calloused from work, but his eyes soft as they met Clara's. He paused on the porch, taking in the sight of her sitting there, serene and expectant. Over the months, he had learned patience, learned to care not only for the land, but for the life they were building. He had become a man shaped by love, responsibility, and hope. And the presence of Clara and their unborn child had awakened a side of him he had long forgotten.
"You awake early," he said, his voice low and steady.
Desk, Clara smiled.
I always wake early now.
I like watching the sun rise. It feels like anything is possible here.
Ethan nodded, moving to sit beside her.
He reached out, placing his hand gently over hers, feeling the steady rhythm of her pulse and the life growing within her. Anything is possible, he said softly. We'll make it work. I promise you that. The ranch had changed in ways small and significant. The fences were repaired, the barns organized, and the fields carefully tended. Clara had sewn small touches throughout the house, softening its stark edges with warmth and color. Every day brought a rhythm, a balance of work, care, and quiet companionship. But now, with the child's arrival drawing near, everything felt different. There was a tension, a mix of excitement and nervousness that neither of them had experienced before. As the weeks passed, Clara prepared for the birth with meticulous care. Breast. She organized the nursery, folding tiny clothes, placing soft blankets in the small crib, and arranging handmade toys along the shelves. Each task was infused with love, with the hope of the family she and Ethan were creating together. Ethan assisted in his own way, building shelves, repairing furniture, and ensuring that the house and barn were safe and ready. It was labor that carried a different weight now, not only the weight of responsibility, but the weight of joy and anticipation. One evening, as the sun dipped low behind the hills, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch, the air filled with the scent of fresh grass and the quiet murmur of cattle. Peer. Clara rested her hand on her belly, feeling the gentle kicks and movements that reminded her of the life they were bringing into the world. Ethan watched her, a trace of awe and tenderness in his expression. Breaths. You're amazing, he said quietly. I don't know how you do all this and still keep going every day. I'm strong because I want this. I want this life, Ethan. I want our child to know love, to grow up here, safe and happy. Ethan reached over, taking her hand in his. And they will. We'll do it together. I'll make sure of it. The days grew shorter as autumn approached. The air was crisp, the leaves turning shades of gold and red, and the ranch seemed alive with quiet anticipation. Clara's labor came on a chilly morning, the sun just beginning to rise over the horizon. Ethan, who had learned to handle life's challenges with steady calm, found himself both nervous and exhilarated. He had prepared for this moment, yet nothing could fully prepare him for the profound experience of witnessing the birth of his child. The labor was long and intense, but Clara faced it with courage and strength. Ethan stayed by her side, offering gentle words, steady hands, and unwavering support. He marveled at her resilience, at the quiet determination that had carried her through every challenge of life and work on the ranch. When their child finally arrived, a healthy baby with soft hair and bright eyes, Ethan felt a rush of emotions unlike anything he had ever known. Love, awe, gratitude, and an overwhelming sense of responsibility. Clara held the child first, her face radiant with relief and joy. Ethan reached over, placing a hand on both their backs, feeling the warmth and life that now connected them. We did it, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Their days after the birth settled into a new rhythm. Nights were long, filled with feeding, rocking, and quiet moments of wonder. Clara and Ethan learned together, navigating the challenges and joys of parenthood with patience and care. The ranch, once a place of work and solitude, had become a home filled with laughter, learning, and the soft hum of life. Neighbors and friends from nearby towns began to visit, curious about the new arrival. Ethan, once wary of gossip and judgment, welcomed them with quiet pride. Clara, always warm and gentle, shared stories of the child's growth, the challenges of ranch life, and the joys of simple moments. Together they created a community of care and support, a small circle of people who respected their dedication and honesty. Each day brought new lessons. Clara learned to balance her responsibilities on the ranch with the demands of a newborn, and Ethan learned the depth of patience, tenderness, and attentiveness that parenthood required. Grasp. They laughed over small mishaps, a spilled bottle, a misplaced blanket, a calf wandering too close to the house, and celebrated milestones, from first steps to first words. Their bond deepened, strengthened by shared effort, mutual respect, and the profound joy of watching their child grow. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara and Ethan sat on the porch, watching their child play in the yard. The golden light of the setting sun bathed the fields, and the ranch seemed alive with energy and peace. Ethan's hand rested on Clara's, and he glanced at her with a quiet smile. You were right, he said softly. Life here, best. It's fuller, richer. I didn't realize what I was missing until you came. Clara smiled, her eyes glistening with emotion. We've built this together. Us, the ranch, our home, our family. It's ours, Ethan. He nodded, looking at the child running through the grass, laughter ringing out across the fields. Breaths. Yes, ours. The seasons changed, each bringing its own beauty and challenges. Winter arrived, blanketing the ranch in snow, and with it came long nights by the fire, quiet moments of reflection, and the reassurance of family. Spring followed, painting the fields in green and gold, with new calves and fresh growth. Each day was a reminder of the resilience of life, the rewards of hard work, and the strength of love. Clara and Ethan watched their child grow, learning the values they had built their lives upon: honesty, care for the land, respect for work, and the importance of family. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a sanctuary, a home, and a place where love and life intertwined naturally with the rhythms of the earth. Neighbors spoke quietly of the couple's story, admiring their courage and dedication. They had seen a woman arrive with bold intentions, a man shaped by solitude and work, and together they had created a life that was honest, strong, and full of love.
It became a quiet inspiration, a story of patience, trust, and the rewards of openness and sincerity.
Even in quiet moments, when the work of the day was done and the child slept peacefully, Clara and Ethan would sit on the porch, hands intertwined, watching the sunset over the fields. They reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from the bold words spoken months ago, through seasons of hard work and learning, to the joy of family and home. Each moment was a reminder that love, patience, and courage could create a life far richer than either had imagined alone. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky filled with the soft pinks and purples of twilight, Clara rested her head on Ethan's shoulder. Their child played nearby, laughter ringing through the air. Ethan kissed the top of her head, feeling the quiet contentment of a life fully realized. "We've come a long way," he said softly. Clara smiled, closing her eyes. "We have, and we've built something real. Something lasting." Ethan nodded, glancing out across the fields, at the barns, the fences, the animals, and the life they had nurtured together. "And it's only the beginning," he said quietly, hope and pride in his voice.
The ranch, alive with the energy of family, work, and love, stood as a testament to their journey.
They had faced challenges, navigated fears, and embraced change, and in doing so, they had created a home filled with warmth, laughter, and life. And as the stars appeared one by one in the evening sky, Clara and Ethan understood that the greatest legacy they could leave was not in wealth, land, or possessions, but in love, trust, and the family they had built together. With hearts full and eyes fixed on the future, they held each other close, ready to face whatever came next, confident that together they could weather any storm, celebrate any joy, and nurture the life they had so courageously chosen to build. The ranch, once a place of solitude, had become a living story of hope, devotion, and the enduring power of love.